This message is a presentation of Pinnacle Baptist Church and the preaching ministry of Pastor Ray McBarry. Other messages like this are available online at pinnaclebaptist.com. The church is located at 2517 High Falls Road in Griffin, Georgia. If you're in the area, we would love for you to visit us this Sunday. Now, here's today's message.
We finished Daniel chapter 9, which I think is the most exciting chapter in the entire Bible to study. Last week we were in Daniel chapter number 10, and it's one of those few glimpses in the Bible into spiritual warfare, the unseen spiritual battle that constantly goes on every day between angels and devils, or angels and demons, as most of the world refers to them. It's a spiritual battle that's going on all around us, even right now, while we sit here in church tonight. It's an exciting glimpse into that spiritual battle that Paul talks about in the New Testament. Tonight, we're in Daniel chapter number 11. Daniel chapter 11 is just as detailed as Daniel chapter 9 was with Daniel's 70 weeks. In fact, the reality is, although Daniel chapter 9 deals with a great amount of precision detail regarding the coming of the Messiah, Daniel chapter number 11 actually has more detailed prophecy even than Daniel chapter number 9. Daniel chapter 11 has more historical prophecy than any other chapter in the Bible. And when we go through the chapter tonight, it will astound you at the amazing accuracy of the prophecies given to Daniel in this chapter regarding events that would occur over the next 300 to 400 years after Daniel's passing. I think one of the things that's most astounding is that as we go through, you'll see that it's not just general prophecies. You know, if you've seen any of the specials on television over the years or done any reading about the predictions of Nostradamus or Edgar Cayce or some of the other so-called prophets of modern times, you know, it's kind of like, reading the Chinese fortune cookie. It's so general, so ambiguous, most of their prophecies could apply to almost anything. But when you read what we already studied in Daniel chapter 9, there's no getting around. It's a prophecy about the Messiah, and it is Jesus that's the fulfillment of it. There's no getting around it. Same with Daniel chapter 11. These prophecies are so detailed and so specific that the historical characters that match up with these prophecies, Daniel chapter 11 is almost like reading a history book that was written 300 years before the events occurred, just as much as it would be if they wrote the events after they occurred. It's that precise, that exact, and that specific. So, we want to look now at Daniel chapter number 11. So with that introduction, let's dig in. We read verse 1 last week as it goes with Daniel chapter 10, but we'll pick up there. Also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. This is the angel talking to Daniel, revealing what the vision was that the angel was trying to get through to Daniel in last week's lesson. Verse 2. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all the realm of Grecia. So here we have in verse 2 the first historical prophecy in this chapter. The angel tells Daniel that there are coming 4 kings of Persia. These 4 kings of Persia, by the way, are historical figures that if you open up a history textbook on ancient Persia, or you go online to Wikipedia and you look at the list of rulers, and you look at those rulers that followed after Daniel, who were the rulers of Persia, you'll find these 4 men mentioned by name. Now, I'm also going to tell you that up through tonight, the first 10 chapters of the book of Daniel, I am well enough rehearsed on them after having studied it and taught it a number of times that I've gone back and refreshed my studying each week before our lesson, but I've not used any notes for the weeks up till tonight. But there's so much historical detail in tonight, I have my notes in front of me. In fact, Abigail, I have my notebook from when I took a class on the book of Daniel in Bible college. And so my teacher that I had was a great teacher. His name is Mike Bagwell. He still pastors in the Atlanta area. He's an older gentleman now, but a great, great Bible teacher. I'm so grateful I had the opportunity to sit under his teaching when I was there in Bible college, especially for the book of Daniel and the companion, the book of Revelation. So I've got my notes from his class, and I'm going to refer to them several times tonight so I get the details right on the history part of things. The 4 Persian rulers that came after Daniel that were the fulfillment of this vision were historical men. The first one was named Cambyses. I'll just write their names up here. He's of no great consequence to us. We'll skip over him. The next one is named Pseudo-Smyrtus. Again, I'm just going to write the names up here and we'll keep right on going. The third one, I misspelled his name. It's a D there. Smerdis. S-M-E-R-D-I-S. The third one is Darius the Great. So I'll just put his name down here.
Is that the same as Darius the Mede?
No, ma'am. That would be a different Darius. I briefly spoke on it last week as we were finishing up, but we were kind of wrapping things up. The Darius the Mede that's referred to in verse 1 appears to be a title for the man who was ruling the city and the province of Babylon for Cyrus the Great when he first conquered Babylon. So he would actually be before these up here under the reign of Cyrus the Great, the one who conquered Babylon. Now we have Darius the Great, who is, he's 4 rulers down now from that. The 4th ruler of Persia, even if you look it up in the history books, you'll find the same name. He's a historical figure. His name is Xerxes. Now, I'm going to say a little bit about him, so you might want to jot a few things down if you're taking notes. First of all, this Xerxes, who is number 4, is the one that's referred to in verse 2 by Daniel. And listen to what it says again in verse 2 about him. And the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all the realm of Grecia. Now, a couple of things. First of all, Xerxes is also mentioned elsewhere in the Old Testament. There's another book of the Old Testament that is about the Persian Empire besides the book of Daniel. In fact, there are several books of the Old Testament where Persia is referred to, but one of them, I know you undoubtedly know the story very well. How many of you are familiar with the story of Esther in the Old Testament? Esther, of course, was a Jew, a Jewish lady, and she was made queen of Persia, a very unlikely prospect to become queen of Persia. And of course, there's the whole story of Queen Esther, how God used her for such a time as this to save her people who were being plotted against by the evil Haman in the story of Esther. Xerxes was the emperor, the king of the kingdom, who made Esther his wife. But if you read the book of Esther, you won't find the name Xerxes. In the Old Testament, he is referred to by the name Ahasuerus. So when you're reading the story of Esther, this is the same Persian ruler that we know in history as Xerxes. Now there's your biblical note about who he was. Let me give you the historical note about who he was. Xerxes is the Persian ruler who had already conquered all of Asia Minor, which is now Turkey, and he turned his eyes farther westward, as you're looking at the map, farther westward, across the Aegean Sea into Europe. No Persian ruler had ever gone into Europe. But he set his eyes on the prize on the other side of the Aegean Sea. Greece, Athens, all the wealth that went with the city of Athens. Athens was the trading capital of the ancient world at that time. Boy, it would be a prize to have, thought Xerxes. So Xerxes took the unprecedented step of building a pontoon bridge from Asia Minor to Europe across that narrow strait called the Bosporus. They literally built it by linking boats together and putting planks down and making a bridge all the way across the strait from Asia into Europe. And he marched the largest army we know of from ancient times across that bridge. 1 million men is how many Herodotus says. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus says he had 1 million men that he used to invade Greece. Now I'm going to tell you, 1 million man army would be quite a sizable force today. But in the ancient world, it was unheard of. But the reason that Xerxes and the Persian Empire was able to field an army of 1 million men is because they had conquered so many other kingdoms that they had just a multitude of people that they could recruit. Everyone they conquered was required to provide soldiers as well as tribute. 1 million man army crossed into Greece. They marched down the coast of Greece heading towards Athens, which was the prize. But along the way, marching down the coast, they came to this narrow strip of land where the Aegean Sea lay on one side, the mountains were on the other, and all there was a narrow strip of land there to march down the seashore. The Greeks sent an army to try to slow them down. They knew there was no way they could stop 1 million man army. But the Greeks were hoping to slow them down, stall them long enough that the rest of the Greek city-states could combine forces and put an army together to face the Persians. The battle at which the Greeks fought Xerxes' army of 1 million men was the Battle of Thermopylae. It's one of the most famous battles in ancient history. Caleb, do you know the story of the 300 Spartans? 300 Spartans from the city of Sparta, along with a couple thousand soldiers from some other Greek city-states, joined together, and they stood shoulder to shoulder in that narrow passageway at the Pass of Thermopylae. And for more than 3 days, the 300 Spartans and the few other soldiers that had joined them held off an army of 1 million men by fighting shoulder to shoulder, shield in front, spears over top. For 3 days, they held off 1 million man army. It was to buy time for the rest of the Greeks to build their army. As it turns out, you probably know the fate. The 300 Spartans, all to a man, died valiantly fighting right there at the Battle of Thermopylae, including the king of Sparta, Leonidas. TR?
But it be remembered that the Persians cheated too and used archers.
Yes, that's true. The Persians finally decided they had lost enough men fighting hand-to-hand against the Spartans, and so the Emperor Xerxes sent word to the Greeks that if they didn't surrender, he was going to blot out the sun with so many arrows that they would be, you wouldn't even be able to see the sun. Leonidas sent back word to him, fine, shoot your arrows. If you blot out the sun, we'll just be fighting in the shade. So, that's the story that goes anyway. But Xerxes proceeded from there down to Athens, burned the wealthy city of Athens to the ground, took all the wealth he could find, and in the meantime was intent on conquering the rest of Greece. But the Greek navy met him a short time after that in the largest, or one of the largest naval battles of ancient history, the Battle of Salamis Bay. And at that battle, the Greek navy, led by the Athenian navy, Themistocles, that's right. He was the one who led the navy from Athens. They sunk so many of the Persian ships that Xerxes decided, you know what? It's going to be awfully hard to supply this 1,000,000-man army with no ships. So he ordered almost the entire army back to Asia. He left about 100,000 men in Greece. The very next year at the Battle of Plata, they were all destroyed and annihilated by the Greeks. So the Greeks ran them back out of their country. But Xerxes is the important one here in the prophecy in verse 2, because he is specifically said of the prophecy in Daniel chapter 11, he would be far richer than all the other Persian rulers, and by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. That's exactly what he did. He recruited men from all over the Persian Empire, invaded Greece, burned Athens to the ground, and took all the loot back home. Well, in addition to stirring up all of his people against Greece, guess who he also stirred up? He stirred up Greece. And you'll remember from several chapters back now, when we were studying in chapter 8, how the vision Daniel had of the ram and the he-goat. The ram being a picture of the Persian Empire, and the he-goat being that he-goat that was brought to anger by the ram, the he-goat of Greece, with the one notable horn between his eyes. And remember what the he-goat did to the ram? TR?
Smacked him to the side of him and slipped that horn right into his side.
That's right. The prophecy said that the he-goat with the one horn between his eyes was filled with anger and charged the ram of Persia. And he was moving so fast, his feet were not even touching the ground. And of course, we know what happens after the Persian Empire, because we've already studied this a couple of times in a couple of chapters in the book of Daniel. What empire is going to rise and challenge the Persians? The Greeks, that's right. And who is the king who's going to lead the Greeks against the Persians? The one represented by the one horn between the eyes on the goat. Did you know it, Braden?
Yes.
Braden, you got it right. Alexander the Great. Well, I'm glad you knew it. Miss Barbara, you got it right too.
I want to answer the next one.
So we've already set the stage for what's coming next in the vision. But that's Xerxes, the fourth Persian ruler. All of that is just in verse 2. Now let me stop before we go any further and give you a little more information. Daniel, do you remember the date, the year, BC, in which Daniel was taken from Jerusalem back to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar? Here's the birth of Christ, so we'll put 0 on the timeline. Daniel was taken captive in the first of 3 invasions by Nebuchadnezzar into Jerusalem? Kim? That's right. It's actually 605. I may have given you the wrong date, but it's 605 BC. 605 BC is when Daniel and his companions were first taken back to Babylon. The Babylonians are no longer running the world. The Persians are running the known world at the time. Daniel at this time is an older man. As we mentioned last week, this particular prophecy we're looking at is probably somewhere in the area of 537 BC. This prophecy from chapter 10 and chapter 11. Alexander the Great will conquer the known world long about 333 BC. So as you can see, there's still 200 years between when Daniel has this prophecy revealed to him and when Alexander the Great is going to conquer the world. These other events that we're about to study will take place after Alexander the Great and will last up until about 150 BC. So all of the prophecies in Daniel chapter 11 that we're going to be seeing tonight occur up to 400 years before the events actually take place. The skeptics, the scoffers, those who try to doubt that the Bible is actually divinely inspired, the Word of God, they would normally say, well, these predictions, yeah, they were written as predictions, as prophecies, but what really happened is somebody over here on the timeline probably wrote everything that happened after it had actually happened, and they intentionally wrote it so it would sound like it was a prophecy written hundreds of years ago, but it really was written after the fact. Now, that's what liberals would say to try to get you to doubt the Bible. There's a problem with that, though. And I've mentioned this 1 week before in the past. Let me mention it again. The entire Old Testament was translated into Greek somewhere around 280 BC. And when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, that was the name of that Bible was called the Septuagint. Sometimes you'll see it referred to by the Roman numeral LXX. That means 70. Because there were 70, actually to be precise, 72 Jewish scholars who translated the Bible from Hebrew to Greek around 280 BC. Almost 300 years before the birth of Christ. The Septuagint is the Old Testament Bible that Jesus quoted the most during his earthly ministry. So when you're reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you see Jesus quoting the Old Testament, he's quoting from the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament that was around for 300 years before his birth. He's not quoting from the Hebrew Old Testament in most cases. So here's the problem for those liberals who like to say the book of Daniel and the prophecies were written after the events occurred later on. The problem is when the Hebrew Bible was translated into the Septuagint about 300 years before Christ, the book of Daniel was also translated into Greek, which is a proof that the book was already around before any of these events occurred that we're about to read about tonight. So it blows holes in the theory of the liberals who say somebody wrote it after the events occurred. They don't know what to do with the book of Daniel. it astounds and amazes them. All right. Now, let's look at some of the details of the process. Yes, Mary?
Going back to Daniel and his companions, was that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego?
Yes, ma'am, that's right. You're exactly right. Now, I'm going to erase everything else that's on the whiteboard right now, because for the remainder of the chapter, we're going to need a map. So I'm going to draw my very crudely drawn map of this area of the world we've been talking about. Don't laugh at the preacher's drawing, but I'm going to do my best here. All right. This is Asia Minor, which is today the country of Turkey. This island that's just below Turkey today, what's the name of that island? Anybody know? Brother John? Cyprus is right. Brother John, I'm throwing that one away. All right, here's Cyprus. Down here is a river you're all familiar with. What's this river? I haven't called on anybody, Braden. Braden, tell us what river it is. The Nile River. Thank you, that's right. Hey, I'm glad you're excited to answer questions.
From now on, raise your hand, please. No.
All right. All right, so here is Egypt down here with the Nile River. Over here in the land of Israel, there are two important bodies of water that we're familiar with. What's this one up in the north?
Sea of Galilee?
That's right, Mary. Sea of Galilee. And what's this one down here?
Jordan?
Well, here's the Jordan River.
Oh, okay.
Dead Sea.
Abigail, you're right. That's the Dead Sea.
I learned about this last year.
All right. Jerusalem will be somewhere thereabouts where I've put the star. All right? So, this is our basic map that we're going to be using for the rest of the evening. Further over to the east, of course, is the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Persian Gulf. Further over to the east. We won't need those tonight, however. All right, let's continue on in chapter number 11. Verse 3 says, "And a mighty king shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those." This king that's going to rise up and do whatever he wants to do, and none can stop him, is none other than Alexander the Great. He will rise up in Greece, conquer the Persians, and go on to expand beyond there. The things that it says about Alexander the Great, we've already seen in some detail in other chapters of the book of Daniel, but look what it says. "When he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided between the four winds of heaven." Remember when Alexander the Great dies, he has no male heir. The truth is, he had two young sons that were just children, but they were killed, assassinated. So he had no male heirs to which the Greek Empire could be left. I know it's sad that they killed his kids. Abigail's looking sad for them there. When he died, and there's no one to take over the kingdom from his lineage, the kingdom was then divided between how many of his generals? 4. That's right. 4 of Alexander the Great's generals divided up his kingdom, each one taking the portion that his army was already in control of, and each of the 4 wanting the whole thing. One of the 4 generals took Macedonia and Greece, that's off our whiteboard. It's off our map over here, further to the west. A second one of his generals took over the area of Asia Minor and right across the Bosporus in the area just across in Europe on the other side of the strait. The area of Thrace, Thrace, and Asia Minor. The other 2 generals of Alexander the Great, though, are the 2 that are the most significant because they're the 2 that are dealt with in the rest of the chapter 11. One of the kings, or one of the generals rather, controlled roughly all of Egypt and all of the area of Israel, what is today Israel. This general that formerly had been a general of Alexander the Great, anybody remember? Ptolemy. That's right. Miss Kim got it.
I said raise your hand.
Ptolemy is the correct answer. But there was another of his generals that ruled the area, basically everything that wasn't in Asia Minor, wasn't in Egypt, all the way beyond the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This general, does anyone in the back know his name?
Nobody say anything.
Going once, going twice. Now for the adults. Yes, sir? Braden? TR? All right. One of the rulers that will be from his lineage later on is Antiochus Epiphanes. You're right. Very good. But what's the name of that general that the whole lineage started from? Remember? Seleucus is his name. That's right. It's not an easy name. Seleucus. It is a funny name. All right, so we've got the Ptolemies ruling Egypt, the Seleucids ruling what is really Syria and the area beyond. This will be known as the Seleucid Empire, and this will be known in Egypt as the Egyptian or the Ptolemaic Empire. All right? These 2 are the ones we will see throughout the rest of this chapter in very great detail. Verse number 5. And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him, and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. We're talking, of course, here about the kingdom of the south, the Ptolemies. Their kingdom would be a great and powerful kingdom. Verse 6. And in the end of years they shall join themselves together. For the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm. But she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. But out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail, and shall carry captives into Egypt their gods. Now, I want to stop here in verse 6 and explain a little bit about what's going on here. Verse 6 is giving a description of a historical event that occurred in which one of the daughters of the Ptolemies, Ptolemy II's daughter, her name was Bernice, Berenice. His daughter Bernice was married off to the king of the Seleucids. It was one of those political marriages, like you read about a lot in the history books. It was a marriage intended to bring a truce between the two empires, a diplomatic marriage. The only problem is that the king of the south, Ptolemy II, he's offering his daughter's hand in marriage to the king of the Seleucids, but the king of the Seleucids was already married. And his wife didn't appreciate that he was now thinking about marrying the daughter of the king of Egypt. I think you can probably imagine why she wasn't real happy about that. Her name was Laodice, for whom Laodicea, the city in Asia Minor, was later named. The king of the Seleucids, though, saw this as a good move diplomatically. So he divorced his wife and married Bernice, daughter of Ptolemy II. However, the story doesn't end there, because it's a historical fact that the wife he divorced, Laodice or Laodice, she ends up killing her former husband and his new wife and put her son on the throne, ruling the Seleucid Empire. So when we read this passage here, in verse 6, it's describing exactly what happened historically, but it happened after Daniel was already dead and gone. It's a prophecy that was fulfilled. Let's read verse 6 again. And in the end of years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm. But she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. But out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail. I'm going to erase the names that are currently on the board, because now we've got a new part of the story. She's gone. What verse 7 is telling us is that another member of the Ptolemy family, in retaliation for Bernice being murdered, assassinated, the new ruler of the Ptolemies will come and invade the Seleucid Empire and attack the fortresses and win the battle. While he's there, he's going to take some things with him. Look at verse 8. And shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods, with their princes, and with their precious vessels of silver and of gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So the Ptolemy that invades, I'm going to write his name. You don't need to remember it, but if you want to write it down so that you can go back and look it up in historical things and see that it is in fact something that historically occurred, Euergetes is his name. Ptolemy Euergetes. He invaded the kingdom of the north, won the battles, took a bunch of wealth and loot, and went back to Egypt with it. Verse 9 says, so the king of the south shall come into his kingdom and shall return into his own land. He invaded the north, took what he wanted, and returned home. That's Ptolemy Euergetes. And if you read the history books, you can see that that's exactly what happened historically. Very detailed, but it came to pass. The next part of the prophecy of the history between these two kingdoms is verse 10. But his sons shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces. And one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. This is talking about two of the sons of the king of the north. When Ptolemy Euergetes invades the north and then goes home, of course, that leaves the northern kingdom stirred up and angry because they were defeated and a bunch of their stuff got taken. So the next part of the prophecy here is verse 10, and it says that two of the sons of the king of the north are going to try to invade Egypt, to take back what was stolen, and perhaps more. He had two sons, by the way, and the date for this one I do have. It's 225 to 205 BC that these two sons try to invade the king of the south. The first of the two sons is Seleucus III. And you can read about him in history. He was generally a weak king and was not that successful. The second son, though, was very successful and a very strong ruler. His name was Antiochus. This one, yes, Antiochus III that invades. And notice here it says in verse 10, one shall certainly come and overflow. This is Antiochus III. And pass through, then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. When it says pass through, what it's referring to is that he would pass through this area, the land of Israel, the Holy Land, as we know it from later history. In Daniel, we've already seen it referred to as the pleasant land. Look here. On the map, Israel is in the middle between these two superpowers, the king of the north and the king of the south. If they want to go to attack the other one, they both have to go through the land of Israel. Israel is caught in the middle of all of this that's going on. So verse 10 says that the king of the north, one of his two sons, is successful in coming back and attacking Egypt. Verse 11. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler. Someone remind us what choler means. C-H-O-L-E-R. Choler. He'll be moved with choler. Anger. Anger, that's what it means. The king of the south shall be moved with choler. Is my sound's going off, so give me one moment. Verse 11, the king of the south shall be moved with choler, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. And when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it. For the king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. So here what we're seeing is that after the second of the two sons of the Seleucid successfully invades Egypt, That in turn stirs up the king of the south, who again invades the north, is victorious, and kills tens of thousands. But then we read that the king of the north comes back with an army even larger than the one that he had before, and again invades the south, this time successfully. Are you following the story here? It's back and forth between these two. And if you read the history books between the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire, this is an exact detail of what happened for 200 to 300 years between these two superpowers. And yet Daniel is recording the words of the prophecy several hundred years before they actually occurred. Verse 14. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. Now verse 14 is significant because the angel who is talking to Daniel specifically refers to thy people. Now he's talking to Daniel, so who are Daniel's people? Who are Daniel's people? Am I starting to lose you? Daniel. Who are Daniel's people? Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Someone in the back there.
My name is Brady.
Who are Daniel's people?
Stop whispering. The Jews.
The Jews, that is correct. The Jews are Daniel's people. So what this is saying here in verse 14, it's kind of stuck in between these other verses about what's going on between the king of the north and the king of the south. But the angel refers to the robbers of thy people. Apparently, verse 14 is saying that there are going to be some Jews in the land of Israel who are going to be traitors. They're going to betray the king of the south, who is the one who has been looking after them as their protectorate for more than 100 years at this point. Some of the Jews are going to betray him and go to work for the king of the north as spies. That's apparently what's being referred to in verse 14, the robbers of thy people. They're Jewish traitors trying to help the king of the north. Look at verse 15. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. Again, we see another name for the land of Israel. Daniel has referred to it as the pleasant land. Here the angel refers to Israel as the glorious land. Again, these two are having to pass through Israel, and Israel is bearing the brunt of much of this because every time one of the armies passes through, they are taking what they want for their army as they go through. Verse number 17. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give the daughter of women, corrupting her, but she shall not stand on his side, neither before him. Now, verse 17 is telling us about another very significant fact from world history. It's telling us that one of the kings of the north, after getting the upper hand on the king of the south, said, okay, let's call a stalemate. Let's call another truce. And let's do it the same way we tried to do it years before with the diplomatic marriage. So the ruler of the Seleucids sends his daughter to marry the king of Egypt, Ptolemy. It's a woman that's very famous from history. I'm sure you would recognize her name. Her name is Cleopatra. So Cleopatra was actually not an Egyptian. She wasn't even from the Ptolemy family. She was from the Seleucids and was sent as the daughter of the Seleucid ruler to marry the king of Egypt, a Ptolemy. Now, I think it's important for us to mention at this point that the rulers of the Seleucid Empire, even though this is in Syria, they're not Syrians. And the ruler of Egypt, even though they're in Egypt, they're not Egyptians. They're both the descendants of two of Alexander the Great's generals. Alexander the Great was not Syrian and he was not Egyptian. What was Alexander the Great? Greek. So this is a Greek family ruling the Seleucid Empire and another Greek family ruling Egypt. These are Greeks fighting it out, but they're using the manpower of Syrians and Egyptians to do all the fighting. Abigail?
But when they're fighting, I'm just like, for Israel.
That's right.
They're like still right in the middle of it. They like technically have nowhere to go else. Anywhere they go, something bad's going to happen either way.
You're exactly right. And Abigail, I think you're getting the picture of what the angel is showing to Daniel. It's going to be a bad time for his people because they're caught in the middle of this.
There's like no way out.
You're exactly right. Nowhere to go. They're stuck there. And as we said, each time an army goes south or heads north, as they march through Israel, they take whatever they want or need, and Israel is decimated each time. So Cleopatra is married off to Ptolemy, the current ruler of Egypt. The reason he sent his daughter to marry the king of Egypt is because he assumed that Cleopatra, being his daughter, she's going to still be loyal to daddy. And that will give him an inside track into maybe, hopefully, taking over all of Egypt as well. The only problem was Cleopatra, and this is a historical fact, she was not loyal to daddy. She was loyal to her husband. Didn't do what her daddy thought she would do. She remained loyal to her husband even when her daddy tried to get his way and get her to work with him to take over Egypt. It's exactly what the verse said, though. Look at verse 17 again. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do. And he shall give him the daughter of women. Cleopatra was said to be very beautiful, you'll remember from history. Corrupting her. But she shall not stand on his side, neither before him. This prophecy of him giving his daughter's hand in marriage so she would work for him, but her not ending up on his side, was recorded in this prophecy more than 200 years before it ever actually happened in history. Isn't that just astounding at how detailed this prophecy is given to Daniel by the angel here? I'm keeping an eye on the clock, but I've got to get to a certain point here. Verse 18. After this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many. But a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach, he shall cause it to turn upon him. Then he shall turn his face toward the ford of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Now, I've got to cover these two verses before we stop for the evening because this is, I need my map that we're using. These verses, verses 18 and 19, tell us that the new ruler of the Seleucid Empire, who also was named Antiochus, decided that, he wasn't getting too much help from Cleopatra down here. So he set his sights on the isles. Now, the isles we're referring to would be the isles on the other side of Asia Minor. They would be the islands that would make up the area all around the coast of Turkey and all in the Aegean Sea till you get to Greece. These islands would have been very wealthy, lots of money. So he turns his attention this way and builds a huge fleet of ships, approximately 100 large warships, we're told in ancient history, to sail and conquer these islands. And he's successful. The only problem is he ran into a problem. You see, these islands were technically part of Greece, that's off our map, over here to the west. But Greece was no longer run by Greece. Now we've moved into the time of the growing Roman Empire further to the west. By this point in history, the Romans have pretty well conquered most of Macedonia and Greece. And they consider all those islands to be their islands. At least the islands were under their protection because they all paid tribute to Rome. Rome didn't like the fact that the Seleucids were taking their islands where they got taxes from. Not only that, but the king of Egypt, Ptolemy, had done something pretty sneaky. He had signed a pact with the Romans for protection. So now, Antiochus, he's taken the islands. He's moved an army through Israel again and is about to invade Egypt once again. The only problem is the history books pick up here and tell us what happened. It goes right along with these verses. The Romans received a message from Ptolemy that the Seleucids were about to invade their country. And Ptolemy said, "You're obligated under our pact to come to our defense. We're calling on you to fulfill your obligation." Well, the Romans were already not happy with the Seleucids because they were taking their islands. So the Romans sent 3 men, ambassadors from the Roman Senate, that supposedly met the army of Antiochus right outside Egypt. And they said, "We want to speak to Antiochus himself." So Antiochus comes out and he meets with these 3 ambassadors from Rome. And they said, "Listen, we don't like the fact you've taken our islands. We don't like the fact that you have threatened our ally and you're about to invade Egypt. We want you to know that if you don't give up the islands and march back home and leave Egypt alone, Rome is going to consider it an act of war against Rome. At this point, still the Roman Republic. Well, Antiochus is left between a rock and a hard place. On the one side, he's gotten great wealth from capturing all these islands, and it looks like his odds are pretty good. He's going to fare well when he invades Egypt this time. But on the other side, he doesn't want to make Rome mad, because the mighty Roman Republic has not only now conquered all of Italy, but now all of Greece, and they're moving westward, eastward and westward. So he's got a decision to make. Does he really want to make Rome angry? It's reported that he responded to the 3 ambassadors, "Let me go home and think about it." The Roman ambassadors, though, one of them, so history tells us this, whether it's true or not. The legend is one of the 3 ambassadors from Rome took his staff and drew a circle in the sand around Antiochus on the ground. And he said, "Fine, Go home and talk to whoever you want to, but give me an answer before you step out of the circle. Meaning, of course, that if you don't give me an answer before you step out of the circle, I'm going home to let the Senate know you've declared war against Rome. Antiochus thought better of things, and standing in the circle, he said, you know what? That's not such a bad deal. I think I'll just go home. Please let the Senate know there won't be any war. Now, that's exactly what's recorded here in these verses, and that's what happened. Verse 18 and 19, I'll read them one time before we're finished for tonight. After this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many, but a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. The Romans end up sending one of their generals to stop him. The Roman general Scipio, Asiatic. Without his own reproach, he shall cause it to turn upon him. The last part of the story is that Antiochus went back, but after going back, he decided, you know what? I'm not getting a very good shake out of this deal. So he broke his word to the Roman senators, and he instead used his army to invade Asia Minor, marching towards the direction of the islands that he had already conquered. When the Romans found out about it, they sent this general, Scipio Asiatic. His brother, by the way, was the famous Roman general Scipio Africanus, who defeated Hannibal in the battle against Carthage, in the great Punic Wars that Rome fought against Carthage. So this Roman general is his brother. He meets Antiochus in a battle in Asia Minor, and of course they exchanged words before the battle, and he said, you gave your word, and you've broken your word. Antiochus said, yeah, I changed my mind, more or less. The only problem was that the army of Antiochus was more than 100,000 men when you include all of his infantry, all of his cavalry, which was about 12,000, and he also had war elephants from India he had brought up, as well as camels from the desert. The Roman general, looking across at an army of his enemy, over 100,000 men, the Roman general Scipio only had 30,000 men. He's vastly outnumbered. He has no war elephants because Rome didn't use elephants in their army. He had some cavalry, but nothing to compare to 12,000. So Antiochus said, aha, I'll win the day. The two of them fought. And the Roman army that was so outnumbered defeated Antiochus and his army in such a huge way that at the end of the battle, the Romans, out of 30,000 men, had only lost 350 men. But out of an army of almost or just over 100,000 men, Antiochus was left with fewer than 10,000 men at the end of the battle. It was a slaughter. Antiochus himself barely escaped the battlefield without being killed. He retreated back home. The Romans said, okay, now we're going to give you a second chance to get this right. You can give back all the islands you shouldn't have taken in the first place, and promise not to invade Egypt. Oh, and since you didn't accept this offer the first time, just to make sure you stick to it this time, we're going to go to your capital city and we're going to choose 12 members of your royal cabinet and your family, and they're going to become prisoners back in Rome, and we'll keep them there to make sure you keep your word. And if you break your word and try this again, guess what's going to happen to your 12 friends and family members? Yeah, you won't see them again. Antiochus went back home and didn't invade the islands anymore. And he didn't invade Egypt again during the rest of his kingship. Now, we've come to a good stopping point, except that I'm going to leave you with a cliffhanger here. One of his sons was taken back to Rome as part of that deal. The son that the Romans chose to take back was actually not his eldest son who was in line to be the next king. But it was one of his sons that he loved and cared about. It's the fellow that we know in history later on, TR, as Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes, as a young man, is taken back to Rome as a prisoner of the Romans. You say, how's he going to get back? We know we're going to see him again. We know he's coming back up later in history. In fact, we're about to see him in this chapter. How does he get back from Rome? And you'll have to come back next week to find out how. Oh, that's right. We've got to sing it next week, so it'll be the week after, Lord willing. All right. Any comments or questions before we stop for the evening?